The letter that was never meant to be found. Rain fell softly on the streets of Los Angeles that night, the kind of gentle, persistent drizzle that blurs the glow of city lights and makes memories feel closer than they are. Keanu Reeves stood alone beneath the awning of an old theater, his hands deep in the pockets of a worn black coat, his eyes fixed on nothing. 20 years had passed since the last time he saw Sandra Bullock. 20 years since they shared the kind of friendship that defied explanation, the kind that quietly shaped who they became. And yet, on this night, a single envelope would change everything. He didn't expect it. No one did. It arrived in a box of old scripts sent to him by a film archivist who had been clearing out a studio storage. Inside were faded photographs from their speed premiere, scribbled notes from directors, and tucked between the pages of an unused script, an envelope with his name written in Sandra's handwriting. It was sealed, untouched, and dated to decades earlier. His heart skipped. The edges of the paper were yellowed, the ink slightly smudged. For a long moment, he just stared at it, unsure if he even had the right to open something that wasn't meant for this version of himself. What if it wasn't meant to be read at all? What if it said things he wasn't ready to hear? But curiosity, or perhaps destiny, is stronger than hesitation. He broke the seal, and as he unfolded the pages, the scent of old ink and forgotten time filled the air. Her handwriting was the same, neat but slightly rushed, as if her thoughts had spilled faster than her hand could keep up. The first line made his chest tighten. "Dear Keanu, if you're reading this, it means I was too afraid to say any of it out loud." His breath caught. He felt a tremor deep inside, a stirring of something he had buried long ago. The beginning they never spoke about woe decades earlier. Their connection had been something rare, subtle yet intense, built not on romance, but on understanding. They were both outsiders in their own ways. He, the quiet soul who never chased fame. She, the bright light hiding her own shadows behind laughter. They spent countless hours talking about everything and nothing, sharing secrets between takes, and building a bond that no one around them fully understood. And yet, for all the closeness, there was always a silence between them, an unspoken boundary neither dared to cross. They dated other people, walked red carpets with others, built lives in parallel, but never together. Still, every time they crossed paths at award shows, charity events, accidental coffee shop encounters, the air shifted. "I never knew how to say it without ruining everything," the letter continued. "You were my safest place and my biggest fear. I told myself we were just friends because that's what you wanted. But the truth is, I kept writing versions of our story in my head. The one where we stopped being almost and became something real." Keanu's chest ached as he read. He could almost hear her voice as he traced the words with trembling fingers. What would have happened if she had handed him this letter back then? If she had spoken those words aloud, would everything have changed, or would they have lost the rare bond they cherished? He closed his eyes, remembering the moment that almost was here had been a night, years ago, after a rap party, when the tension between them had been so heavy it felt impossible to ignore. They were sitting on the hood of his car, looking up at the stars. She had leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a brief second, the world had felt perfectly still. "You ever wonder if we missed something?" she had whispered. He remembered how his heart had raced, how every instinct had told him to say yes. But instead, he smiled softly and said, "Maybe, but maybe we found something even better." She had nodded, though her eyes told a different story. And just like that, the moment slipped away, lost to time and fear and the weight of what-ifs. And now, holding this letter, he realized she had been waiting for him to say something too. The heartbreak she never shared further down the page. The tone of the letter shifted, deeper, more vulnerable. "I need you to know something, Keanu. When my father passed away, the only person I wanted to call was you. But I didn't, because I was scared that I meant more to you than you were ready for me to mean. And when I fell in love with someone else, I compared him to you every single day. He never measured up, not because he wasn't good, but because he wasn't you." Keanu felt the sting of tears. He remembered that time, how he had seen photos of her with someone new, how he had smiled and wished her happiness, all while wondering why it hurt so much. He had convinced himself that their connection was meant to remain unspoken. He told himself that if he truly cared about her, he wouldn't ruin what they had. But maybe silence had been the real betrayal. "I never told you this either," the letter went on. "But when I accepted a role in a film overseas, part of me did it to run away. I needed distance, because being near you and not being with you was breaking my heart. A truth he wasn't prepared for. By the time he reached the final page, Keanu's hands were shaking. The words were softer now, almost like a whisper. If life has moved on and this letter means nothing now, I'm glad. I hope you're happy. I hope you found someone who sees you the way I always did. But if there's even a small part of you that still wonders about us, then maybe our story isn't over. Maybe it was just waiting for the right time. He read that line over and over again, as if searching for a hidden meaning between the ink and paper. 20 years. 20 years of missed chances, of paths diverging, of two souls orbiting each other but never colliding. And now, when it was far too late, or maybe just late enough, the truth was in his hands. But what could he do with it now? Was it too late to find her? The choice second folded the letter gently, as if afraid it would fall apart, and slipped it back into the envelope. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city was quiet, wrapped in a soft, melancholic hush. He felt 1,000 questions swirling in his chest, regrets, hopes, fears, all tangled together in a way that only one person could untangle. He reached for his phone. Her number wasn't saved anymore, but he still remembered it. His thumb hovered over the screen. Should he call? After all this time, would she even answer? Would she even want to hear from him? And yet, as his heart pounded and his breath trembled, he realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment they had both been waiting for. Asterisk. The call that changed everything. The rain-soaked streets were empty. When Keanu finally gathered the courage to press the green button on his phone, it felt surreal, dialing a number he hadn't called in almost 2 decades. Every beep echoed louder than the last, each one pulling him deeper into the whirlwind of memories he had tried so hard to bury. And then, after what felt like an eternity, someone answered. Hello? The voice was soft, a little older, a little wearier, but still undeniably hers. For a moment, Keanu couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and every rehearsed word vanished from his mind. Sandra, he finally whispered. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that holds 1,000 emotions. Keanu, she said, almost disbelieving. Is that really you? Yeah, he breathed. It's me. The silence between words they didn't speak for several seconds. Neither knew how to begin. The years had carved new stories into their lives, heartbreaks, triumphs, losses, but in that fragile silence, it felt as if time had folded back on itself. They were once again the people sitting on a film set, sharing secrets between takes. This is unexpected, she said gently. How did you even? I found something, Keanu interrupted softly. Something you wrote. Her breath caught. The letter? He closed his eyes. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to find it, was I? No, she admitted. I wrote it one night when I couldn't sleep. I was never going to send it. I think I hid it in one of the scripts and forgot about it. I never thought you'd see it, but I did, he whispered. And now I can't stop thinking about it. The weight of the past. There was another long silence. Not empty this time, but heavy. Sandra sighed softly, and Keanu could almost hear the memories in her breath. It was a different time, Keanu, she said. We were different people. I was scared of losing what we had. And when life took us in different directions, I told myself it was for the best. Was it? He asked quietly. She hesitated. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I think part of me always wondered what would have happened if we'd been braver. Me too, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I had feelings too, Sandra. I never said them. I thought silence was the safer choice. Silence felt like rejection, she whispered. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He had always believed he was protecting their friendship by not crossing the line. But to her, that silence had been a door closing, one she had never dared to knock on again. What was left unsaid? Can I ask you something? Keanu said after a moment. Of course, if I had said something back then, if I had told you I felt the same way, do you think things would have been different? There was a soft, shaky laugh on the other end of the line. You really want the truth? Yeah. Then yes, everything would have been different. Keanu felt a strange mix of heartbreak and hope swell inside him. Part of him grieved for the life they might have shared, the love that could have been. But another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, not all doors were closed forever. But you know, she continued, we can't change the past. And maybe we weren't meant to be back then. Maybe we needed all these years apart to become who we are now. An invitation, can we meet? He asked suddenly. The words slipped out before he could second guess them. Me? Her voice was cautious, but not unwilling. Yeah, Just coffee or a walk. No expectations. I don't want this conversation to be another almost. There was a pause, then another. Keanu's heart pounded as he waited, unsure if she would agree or if this would be the moment that closed the book on them forever. Okay, she said at last, her voice soft but steady. Let's meet. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. When? I'll be in Los Angeles next week for a charity event, she replied. Maybe we can meet after that? Next week, he repeated, smiling. Yeah, I'd like that. Me too. The week of waiting days leading up to their meeting felt endless. Keanu threw himself into work, but nothing could distract him from the constant replay of their phone call. The sound of her voice lingered in his mind, familiar, comforting, but also filled with questions that neither of them had answered. What did she expect from this meeting? Closure, friendship, a chance to rewrite the past? And what did he want? He wasn't even sure anymore. All he knew was that the letter had stirred something long dormant inside him, something deeper than nostalgia. It wasn't about what could have been. It was about what still might be. On the morning of their meeting, Keanu stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his jacket for the 5th time. He felt like a young man again, nervous, excited, uncertain. He laughed at himself under his breath. How could the people who had known each other for decades feel like strangers about to meet for the first time? The reunion they chose a quiet cafe on Melrose Avenue, the kind of place where no one would bother them, where time seemed to move slower. Keanu arrived early, as he always did, and sat by the window, watching the rain clouds gather again. And then he saw her. Sandra walked in wearing a simple beige coat and a soft smile. That made his heart ache. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes framed by faint lines that told stories of laughter and tears. But she was still her, still the woman who once leaned on his shoulder under a starry sky and asked if they had missed something. Hi, she said as she approached his table. Hi, he replied, standing to hug her. It was a brief embrace, warm, familiar, and yet filled with an unspoken electricity that neither of them could ignore. They sat down, and for a while, they just looked at each other, smiling awkwardly like teenagers on a first date. So, she said with a small laugh, we're really doing this, yeah. He smiled. Finally, more than nostalgia, the conversation started light. Memories from the old days, stories from recent years, gentle teasing about aging and fame. But beneath the surface, there was something else, something unspoken but palpable. Every glance lingered a little too long. Every laugh carried a trace of something deeper. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable rhythm. What? Us? Not happening. Keanu took a deep breath. All the time, her eyes softened. Me too. They fell silent again, not because they had nothing to say, but because the weight of everything they could say was almost too much. They were the people who had lived entire lives apart, and yet, in that tiny cafe, it felt like the universe had quietly rewound the clock, the possibility of now maybe. He said slowly, this isn't about what we missed. Maybe it's about what we still have. She tilted her head, studying him. And what do we have, Keanu? A second chance. He whispered. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a small, wistful smile, she reached across the table and took his hand, not in friendship, not in nostalgia, but with the quiet understanding of two souls who had waited a lifetime to meet again. Then let's not waste it this time, she said. And in that moment, the past stopped feeling like a tragedy and started feeling like a prologue. The coffee that reopened Old Dorthrain had stopped just as Keanu stepped out of his apartment, but the streets still glistened under the pale light of a fading afternoon. Every step he took toward the little cafe felt heavier than the last. He had met thousands of people in his life, actors, fans, strangers, but none of them had ever made his heart pound the way it was pounding now. It wasn't just a meeting. It was 20 years of silence, regret, and unspoken feelings converging into one moment. When he arrived, she was already there. Sandra sat by the window with a steaming cup of tea, her eyes wandering over the rain-streaked glass. Time had touched her gently, a few silver strands in her hair, a deeper calm in her smile. But to him, she was still the same person who once laughed with him under stage lights, who once leaned into his shoulder and made the world feel smaller, safer. You're early, she said with a soft smile when she saw him. Old habits, he replied, taking the seat across from her. I still hate being late. I remember, she said, her eyes holding his for just a second long before drifting away. Awkward beginnings and familiar warmth for the first few minutes. They spoke like old friends, polite, distant, careful. They talked about work, about mutual friends, about the industry that had shaped and sometimes broken them. But beneath the small talk, there was a storm of questions neither dared to ask. "You look well," she said after a pause. "So do you." He replied, "That's debatable." She laughed softly. "Life's been unpredictable. Hasn't it always been?" "True." She nodded, and then the silence returned, that heavy, loaded silence that only existed between the people who had too much history and too little closure. Keanu stared down at his untouched coffee, then looked up. "I didn't call just to talk about the weather, Sandra." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "I know. The letter. Spoken aloud, that letter." He began slowly. "It's been stuck in my head since I read it. Every word. Every sentence." She exhaled, her hands tightening around her cup. "I wasn't supposed to write it, and I definitely wasn't supposed to keep it. But you did, because it was real," she whispered. "Because I needed to say those things, even if no one ever heard them. I was so scared, Keanu. Scared of ruining something beautiful. Scared of losing you. You wouldn't have lost me," he said firmly, her eyes flicked up to meet his. "Maybe not, but maybe I would have lost us, and that felt worse." He didn't respond right away. The weight of her words pressed down on him like gravity. She wasn't wrong. Back then, they were both in fragile places, both building their careers, both terrified of adding complications. But knowing that didn't make the regret any easier. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she continued, her voice trembling now. "It wasn't that we didn't happen. It was watching you walk into rooms with other people, hearing stories about who you were with, and wondering if you ever thought about me the same way I thought about you." "I did," he said quietly. Every time, the story he never told blinked. "You did. I never stopped thinking about you, Sandra," he admitted. "Every time we bumped into each other, every time I saw your name in the credits of a new film, it was like the universe was reminding me of something unfinished. But I told myself I had missed my chance. I told myself you were happy and I shouldn't interfere, and I told myself you didn't feel the same," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. "So I built a life that looked good from the outside, but never felt complete." He reached across the table and gently brushed the tear away. "Maybe we were both too good at convincing ourselves." She laughed through the tears. "Yeah, maybe we were." The question that terrified them both. They sat in silence for a while, the cafe buzzing quietly around them. Keanu's hand lingered near hers on the table. She didn't pull away, so she said softly, "What do we do now?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to disappear again. Neither do I." "Then maybe we stop overthinking and just see where this goes." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. "And if it doesn't go anywhere, then at least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked like the young woman he once knew, the one who believed in magic and possibilities. A walk through memory lane after coffee, they decided to walk. It wasn't planned. It just felt right. The city smelled like rain. The streets glowed under soft streetlights, and the breeze carried echoes of the past. "Remember that night after the premiere?" she asked as they walked side by side. "The one where we ended up at that tiny diner at 2 a.m? "Yeah," she smiled. "You tried to teach me how to eat pancakes with chopsticks." He laughed and failed miserably, but I remember thinking, if I could freeze one night forever, it would have been that one. Keanu stopped walking and turned to face her. "Why didn't you say something then?" "Because I was scared," she whispered. "And you?" "Because I was stupid." Their eyes locked, and something shifted in the air, a current of electricity, a pull that had been waiting to decades to be felt again, a promise for tomorrow. They reached the corner where they would part ways, her car parked one way, his the other. Neither of them wanted to say goodbye. "So, this isn't the last time we'll see each other," she said, almost as a question. "Not if I can help it," he replied. "Next week, dinner?" "Dinner," she repeated, smiling. "It's a date. It's a start," he corrected gently. She nodded, and as she walked away, Keanu watched her go, the same way he had so many times before. But this time was different. This time, she turned around halfway down the street, smiled and waved, and something deep inside him, something that had been asleep for 20 years, began to stir awake. As he drove home that night, the city lights blurred past his window, but his mind was clear. Maybe they couldn't rewrite the past. Maybe they didn't need to. Maybe the real story, the one they had both been too afraid to start, was just beginning now. Asterisk, the dinner that changed the story following week felt longer than any Keanu could remember. Every hour crawled by with an ache of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. His mind kept replaying the moment Sandra turned back and waved at him on that rain-washed street. It was such a small thing, a simple smile and a wave, but it carried something deeper, something that whispered of possibilities neither of them had dared to believe in before. On the night of their dinner, Keanu stood in front of his closet for far too long, staring at shirts like a man choosing armor. He laughed at himself under his breath. He had attended premieres and red carpets without a hint of nerves. But this dinner, felt like the most important event of his life. By the time he arrived at the small Italian restaurant Sandra had chosen, the sun was sinking behind the Los Angeles skyline, painting the city in gold and rose. The place was warm and cozy, with soft lights and the faint scent of basil and wine. And there she was, seated at a corner table by the window, wearing a simple navy dress and the same soft smile that had always undone him. "You're on time," she teased as he approached. "I was early," he confessed, smiling. "I walked around the block twice just so I wouldn't look desperate." She laughed, that same laugh that once made long shooting days feel short. "And here I was worried you might cancel." "Not a chance," he said, catching up on the years that passively started with small talk again, updates on mutual friends, films they had loved and hated, places they had traveled. It felt natural, easy, like no time had passed at all. But beneath the laughter, there was something else, a gentle tension, a quiet awareness that this wasn't just a dinner between old friends. "I watched your last film," she said, sipping her wine. "The one where you played the grieving architect." "Oh yeah? It broke me," she admitted. "The way you portrayed loss, it felt so real. Maybe because it was," he said softly. "Maybe because I was thinking of all the things I'd lost to." Her eyes softened. "Like what?" He held her gaze. "Like chances I didn't take." Sandra looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I think we both have a few of those." The scars beneath the smile as this dinner went on. The conversation turned more personal. They talked about heartbreaks, the relationships that had failed, the people who had come and gone, the moments that had shaped them. "I almost got married once," she admitted quietly. Keanu blinked. "You did?" "Yeah. It was years ago. He was a good man, kind, steady. But when it came time to say yes, I couldn't." "Why not?" "Because it never felt like home," she whispered. "It never felt like us." He swallowed hard. "I know that feeling." "You?" "Yeah," he said. "There was someone. It could have been everything, but something inside me kept pulling back, like I was waiting for something or someone else." Their eyes met, and they didn't need to say it. They both knew who that someone had always been. The night that refused to end dinner stretched into dessert into long, lingering cups of coffee. The restaurant emptied slowly around them, but neither seemed eager to leave. Every story shared pulled them closer. Every laugh softened the years between them. "It's funny," she said, gazing out at the streetlights beyond the window. "For so long, I told myself we were just a chapter in each other's lives. But now, sitting here, it doesn't feel like a chapter at all. It feels like the beginning of the book we never wrote. Maybe it still can be," he said. Her lips curved into a smile, hopeful but cautious. "You really think so?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to go another 20 years wondering." A confession long overdue as they stepped outside. The night air was cool and filled with the scent of rain again. They walked side by side, without speaking, the silence now warm instead of heavy. When they reached her car, Sandra turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. If I had given you that letter 20 years ago, what would you have done?" Keanu took a deep breath. "I would have told you I loved you." Her breath caught. "You what?" "I would have told you that every time we laughed together, every time you fell asleep on my shoulder during late shoots, every time we said goodbye and I didn't want to walk away, I was falling in love with you. I just didn't have the courage to say it." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Keanu, and maybe we can't go back," he continued, his voice trembling. "But if there's even a small chance that what we felt back then is still here, still real, I want to try. I want to know." For a moment, the world felt completely still. Then Sandra stepped forward, her hand finding his, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's still here," she said. "It's always been here." A kiss 20 years in the making. They stood there beneath the street light. Two souls, who had spent half a lifetime circling each other finally colliding. And then, without another word, she rose on her toes and kissed him, gently, hesitantly at first, then with the deep, aching certainty of something that had waited long. It wasn't a dramatic movie kiss. It was soft and real, full of history and heartbreak and hope. It was a promise, not of happily ever after, but of finally giving themselves permission to try when they pulled apart. Both were breathless, both smiling through tears, so she whispered, "Where do we go from here?" "Wherever it leads," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "As long as it's together," and for the first time in 20 years, neither of them felt like they were standing on the edge of what could have been. They were standing at the start of what could still be, a message that never left that night. As Keanu drove home, the envelope with Sandra's old letter sat on the passenger seat beside him. He picked it up at a red light and read the final line once more. Maybe our story isn't over. Maybe it was just waiting for the right time. He smiled to himself, his heart full. The right time, it seemed, had finally come, and this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. Asterisk the past that refused to stay buried for the next few weeks. Everything felt beautifully surreal. Keanu and Sandra began seeing each other more often, dinners that stretched into midnight walks, quiet afternoons at bookstores, even late-night phone calls that lasted until dawn. It was as if the 20 years they had spent apart had only deepened the connection. That was always there. They were rediscovering each other, not just who they had been, but who they had become, and yet, beneath the warmth of their new beginning, something unspoken lingered. The past, with all its missed chances, hidden wounds, and unfinished stories, wasn't done with them, yet it started subtly. Small reminders in conversations, questions left unanswered, a certain look in Sandra's eyes when he talked about a particular year. There were chapters in both their lives they hadn't shared yet, chapters they were both afraid might change how they saw each other. "You're quiet," Sandra said one evening as they walked through Griffith Park, the city lights glittering below them. Double quotes, "Just thinking," Keanu replied. "About what?" "About how strange it is. How after all these years, we're finally here, and yet, there's still so much I don't know." She stopped walking and turned to him. "Then ask me, what happened?" He said softly. "After that letter, after us. Why did you disappear so completely?" Her eyes dropped to the ground. "Because I was trying to forget you." The truth she had buried. They sat down on a nearby bench, the air cool and quiet around them. Sandra took a deep breath, the kind you take before opening an old wound. "After I wrote that letter, I told myself it was over," she began. "I told myself you didn't feel the same way, and I needed to move on. So I did what I always do. I threw myself into work. I took roles I didn't love, traveled nonstop, surrounded myself with people who made me feel less alone. But it didn't work. Not even close," she whispered. "Because every time something good happened, I wanted to share it with you. And every time something bad happened, I wanted to hear your voice. And then, there was someone else." Keanu's chest tightened. "Someone else. We were together for almost 4 years," she said quietly. "He was kind, patient. He loved me, and I tried so hard to love him back. But no matter how hard I tried, I could never give him all of me. Because part of me was still holding on to you. And he knew," she added after a pause. "He knew I wasn't really his. He told me one night, 'You're loving a ghost.' And he was right." "I'm sorry," Keanu whispered. "Don't be," she said gently. "It wasn't your fault. It was mine, for never letting go of something I thought I'd lost forever." "His hidden scars. What about you?" she asked. "What's your story?" He sighed, leaning back against the bench. "After you left, I told myself I was fine. I told myself I didn't need anything more than friendship. But the truth is, I was angry. At myself, at life, at the timing. I tried to forget to. I dated. I even came close to settling down once. But every time I got close, it felt like something was missing. Because of me? Because of us," he said. "Because every time I looked at someone else, I wondered if I was trying to replace something that couldn't be replaced." She smiled sadly. "Sounds like we were both haunted. Maybe we still are." The unexpected obstacle just as their hearts were finally beginning to heal. The outside world intruded. The tabloids caught wind of their reunion, blurry photos of them walking hand in hand, speculative headlines about a rekindled Hollywood romance. At first, they laughed it off. They had both lived through far worse media storms. But as the stories multiplied, So did the questions from friends, from fans, from producers. Suddenly, their private rediscovery was public property. I don't want this to ruin what we're building, Sandra said one night as they sat on his balcony, watching the city below. It won't, Keanu reassured her. It could, she insisted. You know how they are. They'll twist every word, turn every look into a story. And the moment we don't live up to their idea of us, they'll tear it apart. Let them, he said. We're not doing this for them, but what if it's too much? She asked, her voice trembling. What if we lose each other all over again? Then we fight for it this time, he said firmly. We don't run. Not again. An invitation into the real world to prove it. Keanu did something he had never done before. He invited Sandra to a private charity gala, where he was being honored. It was a small event, but for him, it was symbolic, a way of telling the world that she wasn't just part of his past. She was part of his now. Are you sure about this? She asked as they stood backstage, minutes before they were to walk out together. More sure than I've ever been, he said. And when they stepped out, hand in hand, side by side, the cameras flashed, the whispers started, and the headlines wrote themselves. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way she squeezed his hand when the lights hit them. The way she leaned in and whispered, I'm proud of you. It wasn't just a public appearance. It was a declaration. But the past wasn't done at that night. After the gala, they returned to his home, exhausted but happy. Yet as they sat together on the couch, sipping wine and laughing about the absurdity of the press, Sandra's phone buzzed. Her smile faded as she looked at the screen. Who is it? Keanu asked. She hesitated. Someone I haven't spoken to in years. An ex? She nodded slowly. He says he wants to talk. That is important. Keanu's chest tightened. Do you want to see him? I don't know, she admitted. But I think I need to. Not because of him, but because of me. I want to close that chapter properly before I start a new one with you. He stared into her eyes for a long moment, then nodded. Then do it. I'll be here when you're done. A storm on the horizon as she left that night. Something heavy settled in Keanu's chest. He trusted her completely, but he also knew that the past had a way of dragging people backward, especially when they were finally moving forward. He walked out onto the balcony and looked out at the city. The night was silent, the stars scattered across the sky, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before a storm that could either break them apart or bind them together forever. The storm they never saw coming morning after Sandra left to meet her ex. Keanu woke up early and stared at the ceiling, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on his chest. He had promised to trust her, and he did, but trust didn't silence the storm of thoughts swirling in his head. What if the past had a stronger pull than the present? What if she walked into that meeting and realized the chapter she was trying to close was one she was never ready to end? He tried to shake the thoughts away. He went for a run, brewed coffee, read a script that was sitting on his desk, but every page he turned felt empty. His heart wasn't in any of it. Every part of him was with her. By the time his phone finally buzzed that afternoon, his pulse spiked. Sandra, can we talk? It's important. His fingers trembled as he typed back. Keanu, of course. Come over. She arrived 30 minutes later, looking exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. Her eyes were puffy, her voice quieter than usual. She walked into his living room, but she didn't sit. She just stood there, as if unsure whether she had the right to. What happened? Keanu asked softly. We talked, she said, for hours, and everything I thought I'd buried came rushing back. The past refuses to stay silent. Keanu's heart dropped. Does that mean? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. It's not like that. I don't love him. I haven't for a long time. But talking to him made me realize something I've been too scared to admit. I've never really healed from the way things ended. She took a shaky breath. I walked away from that relationship without closure. I carried guilt for years. Guilt for not being able to love him the way he deserved. And seeing him again reminded me of the version of myself I was back then. The one who was still broken. Sandra, Keanu whispered, stepping closer. And the truth is, she continued, I don't want to build something new with you while I'm still carrying pieces of that old version of me. I don't want us to start with half-truths and unfinished stories. So what are you saying? I'm saying I need time, she said. Not because I don't want this. God, I do. But because I want to give us a chance to be everything we could be without ghosts haunting us. The fear of losing her again, her words hit him like cold water. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. She wasn't leaving him, not really, but she wasn't staying either. How much time? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know, she admitted. A few weeks, a month, maybe more. I need to work through some things, and I need to do it alone. He stared at her, trying to breathe through the ache in his chest. Part of him wanted to beg her to stay, to fight for what they were building. But a deeper part, the part that truly loved her, knew she was right. Love built on broken foundations couldn't last. If that's what you need, he said slowly, then I'll wait. She closed the distance between them and pressed her forehead against his. Thank you, she whispered, for understanding, for not asking me to rush. Just promise me one thing, he murmured. Don't disappear again. I won't, she said, tears glistening in her eyes. This time, I'm coming back. The waiting gamut weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Keanu's life. He filled his days with work, with long motorcycle rides up the coast, with visits to friends he hadn't seen in months. But no matter what he did, the absence of her lingered, in the way his apartment felt too quiet, in the way his phone felt too still. They texted occasionally, short, warm messages, sometimes a memory, sometimes just a good morning. But they didn't see each other. They both knew this space was necessary. Still, every night, he found himself reading her letter again, the one written 20 years ago. Each time he read it, it felt different. Sometimes it gave him hope. Sometimes it broke his heart. But every time, it reminded him why he was waiting. And then, after 31 long days, a message appeared on his phone. Sandra, can we meet tomorrow? I think I'm ready. The meeting that would define everything. They chose the same cafe where they had first reunited. Weeks before, the weather was the same too, light rain tapping against the windows, a chill in the air. But the moment Sandra walked in, Keanu knew something had changed. She looked lighter, freer. There was a calmness in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Hi, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Hi, he replied, his heart racing. I missed you, she admitted, smiling softly. I missed you too. For a while, they just talked, about nothing and everything. And then, when the silence fell, Sandra took a deep breath. I needed that time, she said. And now I know, I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not running from anything. I'm not holding on to old guilt. I'm not comparing the past to the present. I'm just here with you, and I'm ready to see where this goes. Keanu's eyes softened. Are you sure? More sure than I've ever been, she whispered. A fragile beginning, a powerful choice. As they left the cafe together, walking through the rain just like they had all those years ago after a premiere night. The city felt different now, quieter, more intimate, as if the universe itself was giving them its blessing. You know, she said, glancing over at him. Part of me wishes we had done this 20 years ago. Me too, he admitted. But maybe we wouldn't have been ready then. And now, he said, taking her hand. I think we are. They stopped under a street light, raindrops glistening on their coats. He looked into her eyes, the same eyes he had loved silently for decades, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Sandra, he whispered, let's stop calling this a second chance. Let's just call it our story, she repeated, smiling. I like that. And in that quiet, rain-soaked night, they made a choice not to erase the past, not to forget the mistakes, but to build something beautiful from them. But fate had one more twist as they walked toward his car. Hand in hand, Keanu's phone buzzed. It was a message from his agent. Urgent. Need to talk about the new project. It's filming in London. 6 months minimum. His heart sank. He hadn't told Sandra about the offer, a massive, career-defining film that had been quietly developing for months. 6 months away. 6 months apart. And now, just as they had finally found their way back to each other, life was preparing to test them again. He looked at her, laughing softly, raindrops clinging to her hair, and felt the weight of a decision pressing down on him. Was love strong enough to survive another separation? Or would history repeat itself? Asterisk the choice that would define their forever. Night, he got the message about the London project. Keanu barely slept. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the rain whispering against his windows. His heart caught between two worlds. It was everything he had ever wanted, the kind of role actors dream about. A story with depth and meaning, directed by one of the greatest filmmakers alive. 6 months in London. 6 months that could change his career, but it would also mean 6 months away from Sandra. 6 months apart, right when they had finally found their way back to each other. The next morning, he brewed coffee, stared at his reflection in the mirror, and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: doubt. The younger version of himself would have chosen the work without hesitation. But now, with her in his life again, the answer wasn't so clear. When Sandra arrived that afternoon for their planned walk, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "You're quiet," she said gently. "What's going on?" He sighed and handed her his phone. "Read this." She scanned the message, her eyes widening slightly. "London, 6 months?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "They want me there next month." "That's huge," she whispered. "This is the kind of project you've always dreamed of." "It is," he admitted, "but it would mean leaving, being away from you. And we both know what distance did to us before." The fear beneath the dream. They sat together on the park bench, where they had shared so many conversations. But this one felt heavier, like the air itself was waiting for their decision. "You should do it," Sandra said finally. Keanu blinked. "What?" "You should go," she repeated. "You've worked your whole life for opportunities like this. I would never forgive myself if you turned it down because of me. But I don't want to lose what we have," he said. "Not again. Not this time." "You won't," she said, reaching for his hand. "Because this time, we're not the same people we were 20 years ago. Back then, we were scared. We let silence and distance break us. But now, we're stronger. And if what we have is real, and I believe it is, then 6 months won't destroy it." "What if it does?" he whispered. "Then it wasn't as strong as we thought," she replied. "But I think it is. I think it's strong enough to survive anything." Her words were brave, but he could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. She was trying to be strong for him, even as the thought of him leaving clearly hurt her. A promise made in the rain that night. They walked the city streets again, hand in hand beneath a soft drizzle. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Every glance, every brush of their fingers spoke louder than words. When they reached her apartment, he stopped her at the door. "Before I decide anything," he said, "I need to know something." "What's that?" "Are you willing to fight for this with me? To stay connected, even if it's hard? To not let the miles between us undo what we've rebuilt?" She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his. "Keanu, I've waited 20 years for this love. 6 months is nothing. Then I'll go," he whispered. "But I'll come back, and when I do, I want us to build something that lasts." "We will," she promised, and in that rain-soaked doorway, they sealed their promise with a kiss, deep and lingering, filled with love and hope and the fierce determination of two souls who refused to let fate win this time. 6 months apart, yet closer than ever. The weeks leading up to his departure were bittersweet. They spent as much time together as possible: lazy mornings cooking breakfast, spontaneous road trips, quiet nights curled up on the couch. Every moment felt sacred, like a memory being written in real time. When the day finally came, the airport was quieter than usual. Sandra stood by the departure gate, her hand intertwined with his, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. 6 months, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's all, and then forever," she replied. He kissed her gently, a kiss that carried the weight of everything they had been through, and the promise of everything still to come. And then, with one last look, he walked toward the gate. For the first time in their story, they weren't parting in silence or regret. They were parting with purpose. Letters across the ocean months apart were harder than either of them expected, but they found new ways to stay close. Every Sunday, they wrote long letters to each other, not emails, not texts, but handwritten letters that crossed the ocean and carried their hearts with them. They shared their dreams, their fears, their mundane days. They wrote about the smell of morning coffee, the way the rain sounded on their windows, the little things that made them think of each other. Sometimes the letters made them laugh. Sometimes they made them cry. But always, they made them feel closer. And with every word written, every envelope sealed, their bond grew stronger. The return in the moment of truth 6 months later. Keanu stepped off a plane and lax, exhausted but exhilarated. The film had been everything he'd hoped for and more, a story that had challenged him, fulfilled him, and reminded him why he loved what he did. But even with all the success, nothing compared to what he was about to do next. Sandra was waiting for him at the arrivals gate, holding a single white envelope. When she saw him, she ran, actually ran, into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "You're home," she whispered against his chest. "I told you I'd come back," he said. his voice breaking. "And I told you I'd be here," she replied. She handed him the envelope. "This was supposed to be a letter for our 1-month anniversary while you were away. But I think it's better if you read it now." He opened it, and his breath caught as he read the first line. "Dear Keanu, 20 years ago I wrote a letter I never meant for you to read. This one is different. This one is for our future." Inside were just 7 words, simple, but enough to bring tears to his eyes. "Will you spend the rest with me?" He looked up to see her on one knee, holding a small ring. "Marry me," she whispered. His heart swelled as he pulled her to her feet and kissed her. "Yes," he breathed. 1,000 times, yes. Epilogue. The letter that started it all here wedding was small. Just close friends, family, and a few familiar faces from the film sets where their story began. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic declarations. Just a people, once separated by time and fear, now bound by choice and love. And in a quiet moment, after the music faded and the guests had gone, Keanu pulled out the old letter, the one written 20 years earlier. He unfolded it gently, tracing the faded words with his fingers, and smiled. "You were right," he whispered to the empty room. "Our story wasn't over. It was just waiting for the right time, and now the right time had finally come."